අයිබෝන් සියලු දෙනාටම අද අප්‍රේල් 2 වෙනිදා සිංහල අවුරුදු මාසේ අපි අද කතා කරන්න යන සබ්ජෙක්ට් එක මේ IMF extended loan facility එක ගැන. ඒකේ risks and benefits මම හිතන්නේ අපි කවුරුවත් හරියටම මේක ගැන දන්නේ නැහැ. ඒක නිසා ඒක අපි අතර සාකච්ඡා කරලා ඩිස්කස් කරලා මේ ගැන දැනගන්න එක හොඳයි. එතකොට මේක සිංහල අවුරුදු මාස නිසා ඊළඟ ඉරිදා අපේ මීටින් එක තියන්න වෙන්නේ නැහැ. මොකද ඊස්ටර් සන්ඩේ එකයි සිංහල අවුරුදු වලට ප්‍රෙපරේෂන් දවස්වල ගොඩක් අය ට්‍රැවල් කරන්නත් 9 සන්ඩේ වෙයි. ඒක නිසා 9 වෙනිදා සන්ඩේ මීටින් එකක් නැහැ. ඊට පස්සේ ආයේ අපි හමු වෙන්නේ 16 වෙනිදා. එතකොට අද IMF extended loan facility ගැන අපි කතා කරනකොට ගොඩක් දේවල් දැනගන්න තියෙනවා. ඊට ඉස්සෙල්ලා මම අපි පොඩි අප්ඩේට් එකක් කරන්න. අපි නියුක්ලියර් පවර් ගැන ගොඩක් කතා කරා. ඒකේ මේ අපි දැන් පබ්ලිකේෂන්ස් දෙකක් ආවිලා තිනවා. එකක් අපි කරේ highly academic විදියට. ඒ කියන්නේ එක කරේ ප්‍රොෆෙසර් ධර්මදාස. ඒක පබ්ලිෂ් වුණා. ඒකේ තාම අපිට උත්තර ගවර්න්මන්ට් එකෙන් හරි කොහෙන් හරි රියැක්ෂන් එකක් ඒ ගැන තියුණාද කියන එක. ඊට පස්සේ අපි ජෙනරල් එකක් කරා අපි ලීඩ්ස් වලින්. ඒක නියුක්ලියර් පවර් ප්ලාන්ට් ඉන් ශ්‍රී ලංකා. අපි ඒක කරේ ජෙනරල් සාමාන්‍ය දැනුම වැඩි කිරීම සඳහා. අපි ඒක පබ්ලිෂ් වුණා. තාම අපිට මේ United Nations වලින් හරි කොහෙන් හරි උත්තර තාම ලැබිලා නැහැ. ආණ්ඩුවටත් අපි ලියුම් යවුවා. උත්තර තාම ලැබිලා නැහැ. ඒ අතරෙම තව ඉතා වැදගත් වැඩක් තියෙනවා. මේ අද උදේ මේ අපේ අයිලන්ඩ් එකේ ගියපු ඉතා වැදගත් දෙයක්. සංජීව ජයවීර සංජීව ගොඩක් වෙලාට සහභාගී වෙන අපේ මීටින්ග්ස් වලත් the need to feed and invest the our school children. මේක ඇත්තටම ඉතාම වැදගත්. දැනට පොඩි හරි සාමාන්‍ය විදියට මේ ගැන ලංකාවේ වෙන දේවල් ගැන කතා කරලා තියෙනවා. ඉතින් මේක අපි කරගෙන යන්න. ඉතින් අපි අඩු ගන්න මේ අවුරුදු අන්තිම වෙනකන්වත් කොහොම හරි share what you can when you can කියන තත්ත්වය තමයි තියෙන්නේ. However small. මොකද මේ පොඩි ළමයින්ටගේ අනාගතය සඳහා ඒක ඉතින් රටේ අනාගතය සඳහා අපි පුළුවන් තරම් සහභාගී වෙලා මේක කරගෙන යන එක හොඳයි. ඒක නිසා අපි මේ සංජීවට මේ ගැන තවත් ලිපියක් ලියලවත් හරි තවත් දැනුවත් කිරීම ගැන ස්තුතිවන්ත වෙනවා. ඒ වගේම තව කියන්න ඕනේ අද අපි කතා කරන්න යන්නේ IMF. Now IMF කියන්නේ International Monetary Fund. එතකොට International Monetary Fund monitors the international monetary system and global economic developments to identify risks and recommend policies for growth and financial stability. The fund also undertakes a regular health check of the economic and financial policies of its 190 member countries. මේකේ ඩිස්කෂන් එකට අපි යන්න ඉස්සෙල්ලා මම ඉතින් අපි පොඩ්ඩක් ඒ ගැන දැනුවත් වුණොත් හොඳයි. ඒක නිසා විනාඩි 10ක් විතර පාවිච්චි කරලා ඒක කරන්න තමයි මම බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන්නේ. සාමාන්‍ය දැනුමක් මේක ගැන. එතකොට අපේ ලංකාවේ මේ පොඩක් මේක බැලුවොත් හොඳයි. ඒ කියන්නේ ලංකාවට දැන් මේ ක්‍රෙඩිට් රේටින් ස්කේල්ස් දෙනවා ඒජන්සිස් තුනකින්. ඒවට අපි ලංකාවේ කොහෙද ඉන්නේ කොහොමද මේක වැටුනේ කියලා බලා ගන්න එක හොඳයි. දැන් Moody's rating කියලා එකක් තියෙනවා, S&P කියලා එකක් තියෙනවා, Fitch rating කියලා එකක් තියෙනවා. දැන් ගොඩක් ඩෙවලොප් කන්ට්‍රීස් සාමාන්‍යයෙන් මේ Fitch rating එකේ AAA සිටුේෂන් එකක තමයි ඉන්නේ. ඒ වුණාට දැන් අපි හිටියේ 2016 දී B+ කියන තැන. අනිත් රේටින්ග්ස් වලත් ඒ වගේම තමයි තිබුණේ. එතකොට 2022 වෙනකොට අපි මේ RD කියන්නේ restricted default, SD කියන්නේ selective default, CA. එතකොට මේ CA කියන්නේ මෙතන, D කියන්නේ මෙතන අන්තිම bottom එකටම වැටලා තියෙනවා මේ ratings එකේ. ඉතින් මේ rating scale එක දැනගන්න එකත් හොඳයි. එතකොට ලංකාවේ මේ ratings අඩු වෙලා ගියපු විදිහ දැනගන්න එකත් හොඳයි. ඉතින් ඒක මේ පොඩි background එකක් තමයි මේකේ දන්වලා තියෙන්නේ. එතකොට මම මේ ගත්ත picture එකේ මේ මෙතනින් රේටින්ග්ස් වලින් යටින් වැඩක් නැති කතාවක් කියන එක තමයි මේ ජංක් කියලා ලියලා තියෙන්නේ. මොකද ඒකේ ගොඩක් අඩුපාඩු මේ රටවල් වල තියෙන ඒවා දක්වන නිසා. එතකොට එතකොට ගොඩක් අපේ ගවර්න්මන්ට් එන්ටර්ප්‍රයිසස් වල තියුණු අඩුපාඩු මේකට මේ වෙලා තියෙනවා. එතකොට මේ මේ මෝඩිගේ සහ එතකොට තවත් අනිත් සාමාන්‍ය රටක ෆයිනන්ස් සිටුේෂන් එක වැදගත් කිරීම ඉම්පෝර්ට් කිරීමට කතා කරන අයගේ තියෙන ස්ටේට්මන්ට් එක. ඒ කියන්නේ government business is not business කියන එක තමයි. මේ ස්ටේට්මන්ට් එක කරලා තිබුණේ නරේන්ද්‍ර මෝඩි ප්‍රයිම් මිනිස්ටර් ඉන්දියා. It is the responsibility of the government to give full support to businesses. Hari, it is not necessary that government itself runs enterprises and remain the owner. The budget has focused that's thereby on a strong partnership with the private sector in India's development. The scope and targets of public-private partnership clearly spelled out in the budget. So, දැන් මේ වගේ එක්සැම්පල් එකක් දැන් ඉන්දියාව දියුණු වේගන යනවා. අපි වගේ නෙමෙයි. ඉතින් එතකොට ඒ මෙච්චර අමාරුවට මෙච්චර ඩිවිෂන්ස් තියෙන රටක මෙහෙම කරගෙන යන්නේ ඉතින් මේවයි මේ ෆන්ඩමෙන්ටල් ප්‍රින්සිපල්ස් වල වැදගත්කමක් තියෙන නිසා. එතකොට අපි බලමු ලංකාවේ ස්ටේට් ඕන් එන්ටර්ප්‍රයිසස්. දැන් ලංකාවේ ස්ටේට් ඕන් එන්ටර්ප්‍රයිසස් කියලා වෙබ්සයිට් එකක් තියෙනවා. ඒකෙන් තමයි මම මේ ගත්තේ. එතකොට ඒකේ බලනවා මේ කොහොමද මේ සිටුේෂන් එක මේ තියෙන එන්ටර්ප්‍රයිසස් වල ඒක තියෙනවා ROA කියලා එකක්. ROA එක මේ ෆයිනෑන්ෂල් කටිය නිකම්ම දන්නවා ඇති. අපි ඉතින් ඒ ගැන කියන එක හොඳයි. රිටර්න් ඔෆ් ඇසෙට්ස්. එතකොට මේ රිටර්න් ඔෆ් ඇසෙට්ස් කියන්නේ ඒ කම්පැනිස් වල ඇසෙට්ස් වලින් ලැබෙන්න ඒ කියන්නේ ප්‍රතිචාරයක් ලැබෙන්න හොඳ ප්‍රතිචාර ලැබෙන්න තියෙන chances වගේ එකක්. එහෙම එකක්. ඉතින් ඒක කියනකොට මේ ලංකාවේ බැලුවොත් දැන් successful government owned enterprises තියෙනවා. They were Employee Trust Fund, National Insurance Trust, Airport and Aviation Services කියන එක. So ඉතින් එහෙම ඒවත් තියෙනවා. හැබැයි එතකොට අපේ bank state owned banks එහෙම තියෙන්නේ unsuccessful හරි marginally successful කියන level එකේ. ඒ කියන්නේ Bank of Ceylon, People's Bank වගේ ඒවා. ඒ වුණාට අපි බැලුවොත් state owned enterprises වල complete failure කියන ඒවා. Ceylon Electricity Board, Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, Sri Lanka Airlines, State Engineering Corporation. So ඉතින් මේ පේනවා දැන් මේ enterprises අපි මේ negative කියලා මේවා කවුද ගෙවන්නේ? ඉතින් ලංකාවේ මිනිස්සු ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ taxes වලින් ගෙවන සල්ලි වලින් තමයි මේක ගෙවන්න ඕනේ. ඉතින් මේක ගැන අපි තව හිතුවතින් තව මේ ගැන expertsලා ඉන්නවා. ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ කරපු talks වලින් මම පොඩි වීඩියෝ ක්ලිප්ස් දෙකක් ගත්තා. ඒකට විනාඩි 2ටම 7ක් යනවා. ඒක පොඩක් ඇහුවොත් හොඳයි කියලා හිතනවා. ඊට පස්සේ අපිට ඩිස්කෂන් එක පටන් ගන්න පුළුවන්. එකක් තමයි මේ ලංකාවේ තියෙන ඇඩ්වොකාටා ඉන්ස්ටිටියුට් කියලා එකක්. ඒක මේ think tank එකක්. ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ තියුණු වීඩියෝ එකක් තියුණා සිංහලෙන් කරලා. ඒක ගොඩක් හොඳයි. ඊට පස්සේ තව ඉන්ටර්විව් එකක් තියුණා ලංකාවේ බිස්නස් ටයිම්ස් එකේ. ඒකේ විනාඩි 2ක විතර ක්ලිප් එකක් තියෙනවා. මම ඒකත් පෙන්නන්නම්. ඒ දෙක බැලුවහම අපිට තේරෙයි පොඩ්ඩක් මේක මොකද්ද මේ IMF loan extended facility එක කියන්නේ කියලා. ඒක නිසා මම ඒ දෙක ප්ලේ කරලා ඊට පස්සේ මේ අපි ඩිස්කෂන් එකට යමු.
ඉතින් අන්තර්ජාතික මූල්‍ය අරමුදලට ගියා. ඕගොල්ලෝ හිතන්නේ ලංකාව අන්තර්ජාතික මූල්‍ය අරමුදලට කී පාරක් ගිහිල්ලා තියෙනවද? ලංකාව අන්තර්ජාතික මූල්‍ය අරමුදලට ගිහිල්ලා තියෙනවා 16 වතාවක්. හැබැයි වැදගත්ම දේ වෙන්නේ අන්තර්ජාතික මූල්‍ය අරමුදලේ 16 වතාවෙන් අපි සම්පූර්ණ කරලා තියෙන්නේ වැඩසටහන් 9ක් විතරයි. ඒකෙන් 7ක්ම අපි මැද්දේදී සම්පූර්ණ කරන්න නැතුව තමයි ගියේ. මේ chart එකේ ඔයගොල්ලෝ දකින්නේ ලංකාව අන්තර්ජාතික මූල්‍ය අරමුදලට ගියපු 16 වෙනි වතාවම සම්පූර්ණ සංක්ෂිප්තයක් විදියට. ඒ වගේම මොන ප්‍රෝග්‍රෑම් එකත් එක්කද අන්තර්ජාතික මූල්‍ය අරමුදල මේ ලංකාවත් එක්ක ගනුදෙනු කරේ කියලා. අන්තර්ජාතික මූල්‍ය අරමුදලේ කෙටි කාලීන වැඩසටහන් තියෙනවා, දීර්ඝ කාලීන වැඩසටහන් තියෙනවා. දීර්ඝ කාලීනවට කියන්නේ extended fund facility කියලා. ඉතින් මේ වතාවෙත් ලංකාව යන්නේ අන්න ඔය කියන extended fund facility එකකට. extended fund facility එකේ තියෙන විශේෂත්වය තමයි ඒක දීර්ඝ කාලයක් සඳහා යන්නේ. කොටස් වශයෙන් මුදල් ලැබෙන්නේ අපි එකඟ වෙන ආර්ථිකයේ සිදු කරන වෙනස්කම් සඳහා. extended fund facility කියන්නේ මේකයි. මොකද ආර්ථිකයේ වෙනස්කම් කරනවත් එක්ක තමයි වාරික වශයෙන් අපිට මුදල් ලැබෙන්නේ. ඉතින් මේ අවස්ථාවේදී අපිට හිතෙනවා ලංකාවේ බොහෝ දෙනෙක් බලාගෙන ඉන්නවා අන්තර්ජාතික මූල්‍ය අරමුදලාව මෙච්චර කාලයක් අර සැප්තැම්බර් මාසේ පළවෙනිදා මාණ්ඩලික මට්ටමේ වාර්තාවකට එකඟ වුණාට පස්සේ අපි හරියටම කිව්වා වගේ දල වශයෙන් අවුරුදු එකමාරක් විතර ගියා. මොකද ඇත්තටම අපි අප්‍රේල් 12 වෙනිදා ණය ගෙවන එක නවත්තන්න කලින් තමයි අපි අන්තර්ජාතික මූල්‍ය අරමුදලේ ඉල්ලීමක් කරේ අනේ අපිට ඇවිල්ලා සහයෝගයක් දෙන්න කියලා. ඉතින් කාලය ගත වෙලා ඔන්න අන්තර්ජාතික මූල්‍ය අරමුදල බාලගිරි අද නොවේ හෙට වගේ අවසාන වශයෙන් යම්කිසි පණිවිඩයක් දීලා දෙනවා. හරි අපි ලංකාවත් එක්ක මේ ආර්ථික ප්‍රතිව්‍යුහගත කිරීමේ වැඩසටහනට යම්කිසි සහයෝගයක් ලබා දෙන්න සූදානම් කියලා. ඉතින් ලංකාවේ හැමෝම බලන් ඉන්නවා මේ පාර නම් අර බෙල්ජියන් ඉන්වෙස්ටර් වගේ ඕමාන් ෆන්ඩ් එක වගේ දියසෙන් කුමාරයා වගේ එකපාරටම අන්තර්ජාතික මූල්‍ය අරමුදලාවට පස්සේ ආර්ථිකය පිබිදිලා මේමයි කියලා ලංකාවේ බොහෝ දෙනෙක් හිතන් ඉන්නවා. නමුත් ඇත්තටම වෙන්නේ එහෙම දෙයක් නෙවෙයි. අන්තර්ජාතික මූල්‍ය අරමුදලට කරන්න පුළුවන් ප්‍රමාණය ඉතාමත්ම සීමිතයි. මේ 16 වතාවම අපි පෙන්නුවා වගේ ලංකාව ගොඩ ගන්න නම් ලංකාවේ කට්ටිය ආර්ථික ප්‍රතිසංස්කරණ ටික කරගන්න අවශ්‍යයි. එහෙම නැති වුණොත් අන්තර්ජාතික මූල්‍ය අරමුදලාවට පස්සේ බොහෝ වෙලාවට සිදු වෙන්නේ ඒ මොනවා හරි පොඩි මුදලක් අරගෙන අපි මොනවා හරි දෙයක් කරනවා සුපුරුදු විදියටම අපි අර වැඩසටහන මැද්දෙන් එළියට ගියාට පස්සේ නැවත වරක් අපි හිටපු තැනටම වැටෙනවා. මෙතන තියෙන අවදානම තමයි ලංකාව මීට කලින් ගියපු extended fund facilities වලින් දෙකක් වගේ ප්‍රමාණයක් තමයි මේ තියෙන දත්ත අනුව අපි සම්පූර්ණ කරලා තියෙන්නේ. ඒ හැම එකක්ම දීර්ඝකාලීන වැඩසටහන හැම එකකින්ම වගේ අපි මැද්දෙන් එළියට පැනලා ප්‍රශ්න ඇති කරගත්තා. නමුත් මේ වතාවේදී මේ තත්ත්වය ටිකක් වෙනස්. මොකද ලංකාවේ ණය ස්ථාවර නැහැ. ණය ස්ථාවර නැති වුණාට පස්සේ අපි අපේ ණය ගත්තු කට්ටියට එකඟ වෙලා අපි ණය ප්‍රතිව්‍යුහගත කරගෙන අන්තර්ජාතික මූල්‍ය අරමුදලේ පොඩි ක්‍රෙඩිබිලිටි එකක් නැත්තම් ඔවුන්ගේ කීර්තිනාමය පාවිච්චි කළා තමයි අපි මේ අවස්ථාවේදී ඉස්සරහට යන්න හදන්නේ. ඉතින් අන්තර්ජාතික මූල්‍ය අරමුදල ආපු පමණින් ලංකාව එකපාරටම වෙනස් වෙනවා කියලා කවුරු හරි හිතනවා නම් කවුරු හරි දේශපාලඥයෙක් එහෙම කියනවා නම් ඒක නෙවෙයි යථාර්ථය. යථාර්ථය තමයි අන්තර්ජාතික මූල්‍ය අරමුදල ආවිල්ලා අපිට ලබා දෙන්නේ ඉතාමත්ම කෙටි සහනයක් විතරයි. අනිත් එක බොහෝ දෙනෙක් කියනවා අන්තර්ජාතික මූල්‍ය අරමුදල ආවිල්ලා ඩොලර් එහෙම ආවට පස්සේ එකපාරටම අපිට ඕන දෙයක් ආනයනය කරන්න ඒ වගේම පද්ධතිය ඩොලර් ප්‍රමාණය වැඩි වෙයි කියලා. ඔව් අපිට යම් කිසි ප්‍රමාණයක් පද්ධතිය දෙනවා. අන්තර්ජාතික මූල්‍ය අරමුදලේ තියෙන සුවිශේෂීත්වය තමයි ඔවුන් ලබාගෙන එන ඔවුන් ලබා දෙන මුදල් ප්‍රමාණය යන්නේ මහා භාණ්ඩාගාරයට නෙවෙයි. ඒ කියන්නේ ඍජුවම ශ්‍රී ලංකා මහ බැංකුවේ සංචිත ප්‍රමාණය වර්ධනය කරන්න. සංචිත ප්‍රමාණය වර්ධනය කරාට පස්සේ අපේ ක්‍රෙඩිට් රේටින් එක නැත්තම් අපිට ණය ගැනීමේ තියෙන හැකියාව අර සාමාන්‍යයෙන් අපි කියන්නේ අපිත් ණය ගැනීම පැහැර හැරෙට පස්සේ අපේ නම යන ක්‍රිබ් එකට අන්නේ ක්‍රිබ් එකෙන් නම පොඩ්ඩක් ඉවත් වෙන එක තමයි වෙන්නේ. ක්‍රිබ් එකෙන් නම ඉවත් වුණාට පස්සේ අපිට පුළුවන් තව පාරක් ගිහිල්ලා ඕනනම් ණය ගන්න. ඉතින් අන්තර්ජාතික මූල්‍ය අරමුදලේ මුදල් ටික ආවට පස්සේ ඒක අපේ සංචිතයට යනවා. සංචිතයට ගියාට පස්සේ අන්න අපේ සංචිත ප්‍රමාණය වැඩි වෙනවත් එක්කම අන්න අපේ ක්‍රෙඩිට් රේටින් එක වැඩි වෙනවා. අන්න එතකොට අපිට නැවත වරක් ගිහිල්ලා වෙළඳ පොලෙන් ණය ලබා ගන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ අතර වාරයේදී අපි අපේ ණයත් ප්‍රතිව්‍යුහගත කරලා කාලයක් වැඩිපුර ඉල්ලගෙන තියෙනවා අලුතෙන් ණය ගෙවන්න. අන්නේ කාලපරතරය ඇතුළතදී නැවතත් අපි අර රේස් එක ටිකක් හයියෙන් දුවලා ආර්ථිකය ප්‍රතිව්‍යුහගත කරගෙන දත්තු ණයයි, කලින් ණයයි, පරණ ණයයි ඔක්කොම ගෙවන්න පුළුවන් තත්ත්වයට ආර්ථිකය හදාගන්න එක තමයි කරන්න ඕන. ඉතින් ඒ නිසා කවුරු හරි හිතනවා නම් අන්තර්ජාතික මූල්‍ය අරමුදල ඔක්කොම වෙනස් වෙයි කියලා එහෙම වෙනසක් කරන්න නෙවෙයි යොවුන් එන්නේ. මූලික වශයෙන් අපිට ලබා දෙන්නේ මූලික වශයෙන් මුදලක් පමණයි. ඒ මුදල ලබා දීම සඳහා කොටස් වශයෙන් ආර්ථිකයේ යම්කිසි ප්‍රතිසංවිධානාත්මක කටයුතු ප්‍රමාණයක් කළ යුතුයි. ඒව කෙරෙන ආකාරය අනුව තමයි අපිට කොටස් වශයෙන් වාරික වශයෙන් මුදල් ලැබෙන්නේ. ඒ ලැබෙන මුදල අපි හැමෝම දන්නවා ඉතාමත්ම සුළු මුදලක්. බිලියන 2.9ක්. ඇමරිකානු ඩොලර් බිලියන 2.9ක් කියලා කියන්නේ ඉතාමත්ම සුළු මුදලක්. ඒකෙන් කොයි වෙලාවකවත් අපේ ආර්ථිකය සම්පූර්ණයෙන් උඩයට මාරු කරන්න බෑ. නමුත් ඔවුන්ට තිබෙන කීර්තිනාමය නිසා අපිට වෙනත් අයගෙන් ණය සහ මුදල් ලබා ගැනීමේ හැකියාව තිබෙනවා. අන්න ඒ විදිහට ඔවුන්ගෙන් ලැබෙන කීර්තිනාමයත් එක්ක ලබා ගන්න මුදල් වලින් තමයි නැවත අපි ආර්ථිකය සක්‍රිය කරලා ඉස්සරහට අරගෙන යන්නේ. ඒ නිසා කවුරු හරි හිතනවා අන්තර්ජාතික මූල්‍ය අරමුදල ආපු පමණින් සියල්ල වෙනස් වෙයි කියලා. යථාර්ථය තමයි ඒ ආර්ථිකයේ කරගන්න ඕන වෙනස්කම් ටික කරගන්න ඕනේ අපිමයි. අන්තර්ජාතික මූල්‍ය අරමුදල කවුරුත් ඇවිල්ලා අපිට ඒ දේ කරලා දෙන්නේ නැහැ. හරියට අපි අර බලාපොරොත්තුෙන් හිටපු දියසෙන් කුමාරයනා වගේ මැණික් කැටයක් පහළ වෙනවා වගේ බෙල්ජියමෙන් එන ආයෝජකයෙක් වගේ ඕමානෙන් එන ආයෝජකයෙක් වගේ නැත්තම් අපි අවසාන මොහොතේ හිතුවා ඇත්තටම චීනය ඇවිල්ලා අපිව බේරගනී කියලා. අපි කිව්වා චීනය කවදාවත් අපිව මග අරින්නේ නැහැ කියලා. නමුත් ඒ සියල්ල බොරු වුණා. මොකද ඒක ලෝකේ යථාර්ථය නෙවෙයි. අපිට මේ ප්‍රශ්නේ උඩට එන්න ඕන නම් අපිම තමයි මහන්සි වෙලා ආර්ථික ප්‍රතිසංස්කරණ කරගන්න ඕනේ. අන්න ඒ විදිහට ආර්ථික ප්‍රතිසංස්කරණ කරගත්තොත් තමයි ලංකාවට පියවරක්
This one is from Business TV. Just
මේ IMF ණය වැඩසටහන මේ විස්තීර්ණ ණය පහසුකම පිළිබඳව රටේ විශාල කතාබහක් කතිකාවක් ඇති වෙලා තිබෙනවා. ඔබ කොහොමද මේ වැඩසටහන දකින්නේ?
ඔව් ඇත්තටම ජයන්ත දැන් ජාත්‍යන්තර මුල්‍ය අරමුදලේ දැන් විස්තීර්ණ ණය පහසුකම කියන්නේ ඇත්තටම extended credit facility එකක්. ඒ කියන්නේ දීර්ඝ කාලීන ණය පහසුකමක්. ඉතින් මේ පිළිබඳව මම පෞද්ගලිකව දකින්නේ මේක ඇත්තටම රටට මේ වෙලාවේදී අවශ්‍ය පහසුකමක්. ඉතින් ඒ අවශ්‍ය පහසුකම ලබා ගැනීමට ලංකාවට එහෙම නැත්නම් ලංකාවේ ආණ්ඩුවට හැකියාව ලැබිලා තියෙනවා. ඉතින් මේ පහසුකම ලබා ගැනීම පිළිබඳව අපි මට හිතෙන්නේ සතුටු වෙනවට වැඩිය අපි සැනසුම් සුසුමක් හෙළිය යුතුයි. ඉතින් ඒ විදිහට තමයි මම මේ විස්තීර්ණ පහසුකම දකින්නේ.
ඒ කියන්නේ යම්කිසි හුස්ම ගන්න ලැබිච්ච අවස්ථාවක්.
ඔව් අනිවාර්යෙන් මේක හුස්ම ගන්න තමයි අවස්ථාව දීලා තියෙන්නේ.
හැබැයි හුස්ම ගන්න ලැබුණට මේකේ ඉදිරිය අනාගතය මත තමයි මේකෙන් ජයග්‍රහණයක් ලබන්න පුළුවන්ද එහෙම නැත්නම් මේකෙන් පරාජයක් ලබනවද කියන එක තීරණය වෙන්නේ.
අනිවාර්යෙන්.
ඒතර ඔබ හිතනවද ඔබ විශ්වාස කරනවද වර්තමාන මේ තත්ත්වය තුළ මම හිතන්නේ මේ ડોකියුමන්ට් එක කියවුවාම කියන දේ තමයි රාජ්‍ය වියදම් දැඩි ලෙස කප්පාදු කරලා තිබෙනවා. ඒතර රාජ්‍ය වියදම් දැඩි ලෙස කප්පාදු කරා කියන්නේ මේ දේශපාලකයන්ට ඉස්සරහට මේ වැඩසටහන තුල ඉන්නව නම් අර රිසි ලෙස වියදම් කරන්න බෑ. ඒතර ඔබ විශ්වාස කරනවද ඒ වගේ තත්ත්වයක් තුළ මේ වැඩසටහන ඉදිරියට යාවි සාර්ථක වේවි? මොකද ඔබට බොහෝ අත්දැකීම් තියෙන කෙනෙක්.
ඔව් දැන් මෙහෙමයි. මේ වැඩසටහන ඉදිරියට ගෙනියන එක ලේසි පාසු වැඩක් නෙමෙයි. ඒක ඇත්තට හැමෝම තේරුම් ගන්න ඕනේ. ඔතන තියෙන ප්‍රධාන සාධකයක් තියෙනවා ජයන්ත. මොකක්ද දන්නවද? ඒක දැන් ඔයා කිව්වා වගේ දැන් වියදම් කිරීමේ නිදහස දැඩි ලෙස සීමා වෙනවා රජයට. මේ වියදම් පාලනය කරනවායි කියන එක තුල ජනතාවට ලොකු පාඩමක් තියෙනවා. ඒ පාඩම තමයි මෙච්චර කල් ඒ වගේම අදත් මේ ජනතාව හිතනවා මේ රජයේ වියදම් කරන්නේ රජයේ සල්ලි කියලා. රජයේ වියදම් කරන්නේ රජයේ සල්ලි නෙමෙයි. රජයේ වියදම් කරන්නේ ජනතාවගේ සල්ලි. ඒතකොට මේ ජනතාව තේරුම් ගන්න ඕනේ මේ රජයේ වියදම් කරන්නේ ජනතාවගේ සල්ලි නම් මේ ජනතාවගේ සල්ලි වියදම් කරන්න විදිය කියන එක ජනතාව තේරුම් ගන්න ඕනේ. එතකොට මේ ජනතාවගෙන්ම ණයට අරගෙන ඒ කියන්නේ මහ බැංකුව හරහා සල්ලි අච්චු ගහලා ණයට අර ගන්නවයි කියන්නේ ඇත්තටම ජනතාවම තමයි මේ ණය ගෙවන්න ඕනේ ඇත්තට. ඉතින් එතකොට මේ ජනතාවගේ සල්ලිම ජනතාව වෙනුවෙන් වියදම් කිරීම පිළිබඳව දැඩි සීමා දාලා තියෙන්නේ මොකක්ද? මොකක් අරමුණු කරගෙනද? හම්බ කරන්න ඉස්සෙල්ලා වියදම් කරන්න එපා කියන එක තමයි මෙතනින් කියන්නේ. ණය අරගෙන වියදම් කරලා පරිභෝජනය සඳහා තමයි අපි වැඩිපුරම වියදම් කළේ. ඒතර මේ හරහා කියන්නේ ජනතාවටත් කියන්නේ හම්බ කරන්නේ නැතුව වියදම් කරන්න එපා කියන පණිවිඩය රජයට ජනතාවත් දෙන්න ඕන ඇත්තටම. ඉතින් මේක මේ වගේ කොන්දේසි එක්කලා ඉස්සරහට ගෙනියන එක මේ ජනතාවගේ අපේ ජනතාවගේ තියෙන සිතුම් පැතුම් සහ ලංකාවේ මෙච්චර කාලයක් රාජ්‍ය කරගෙන ආපු ප්‍රවණතාවය සහ සංස්කෘතිය දිහා බලපුවාම මේක ලේසි වැඩක් නෙමෙයි.
ඒක ඔබ
So I think you all got good idea as to how much responsibility is there for us to for this to get this right. But let's see what others have to say. So we are open for discussion now.
I'm going to speak in English, by the way.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, go for it.
You see, as the second speaker said, the IMF loan is an essential requirement to survive. It's not a rescue package, it's a survival package. But history shows that our systems are wrong, our legislations are not quite right, our processes are not good. So as long as the existing processes, existing systems are carried on, this is only a temporary issue. We'll be back in the same place in a year or 2 years' time. So unless we change our thinking, unless we change our politicians' thinking, unless we adapt a completely different system, I think this is not a solution. It's simply a little bit of breathing space. It's not a recovery. So we must find a way to change the whole system. That's my view. Thank you.
Others, anything else in there? I mean, what you're saying is absolutely right. We have to take control of this. Yes, Ranjan, you are there. Yeah. Ranjan, yes. Ranjan, you're muted still.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, all of you, can you hear me now? Thank you, Chula.
Yeah.
Point one is, I think we are all agreed that is only a lifeline. that this is only a lifeline. I think we are all agreed. Secondly, this is also not an adequate lifeline because we have got only 2.9 billion. This does not bring us up to the level of the requirement needed to make our economy stable. I think the level is about 5 to 6 billion. You see, we should have reserves up to about 5 to 6 billion. So anything less than that, the economy is not stable. That's one point. And the second important point is that I want to make. The people who are handling this loan are the very people who are responsible and accountable to the country for the country's bankruptcy. They're accountable. What happens then is that the people are not going to have much confidence in the same people who rob their money, handling the loan assistance given by the IMF. This is the basic fundamental problem that this government is facing. That is why all this political unrest. You see, that is why. If this is handled by people, by a government in whom the people have confidence, then we can achieve much greater success with this 2.9 billion, that 2.9 billion lifeline that the IMF has given us. It is unfortunate that our politics and the media supporting our politics, you see, distorts the picture for the benefit of people, undeserving people who are responsible and accountable for the bankruptcy. In any other civilized country, you see, those who are accountable withdraw from the scene. You see, if you look at the ethics of British politics, how many prime ministers have withdrawn, and they don't come back again? In South Korea, I know of 2 presidents who went to jail. You see, our people, our presidents, our leaders never go to jail. They hang on. So there is some necessity for civil society to educate the masses. If these politicians they appoint are not are behaving in an irresponsible manner, we have to open the eyes of the polity that they must take action against them and reject them. Okay? So this is something that I think the civil society, a responsibility that civil society will have to undertake. So all indications are that this 2.9 billion will also be used for consumer purposes, which is fatal. And then indications thereafter will be that the IMF program will be abandoned the way we have abandoned the previous IMF programs. Thank you.
Yeah, I think what you said is right, Ranjan, because you can see as soon as this IMF loan came up, then the politicians have started their campaign to leave it because they got the money and they have a lot of restrictions on the way they can spend the money. So, they don't want to obviously adhere to these restrictions. They will somehow now pave the way, try to get out of all these conditions that are there. So we circulated a document which some time ago, but I can show it again. But Lakshman, yes, Lakshman, you raised the hand as well.
Thank you, Chula.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that short video clips on the IMF loan facility. And from the chart that you displayed at the very start, it's clear that up to 2009 or so, 2008, it's only 30 billion, 20 billion, maximum 40 billion or something per year, not per year, the IMF package. Then from 2009 onwards, the total is probably the total foreign debts. After 2009, it has come to 3,000, a huge increase. Of course, that was a period, a lot of the construction work was going on, highways and airports and all that, but still, it is a too big a jump, and we don't know, maybe a good part of that money has gone somewhere, probably. And the major mistake the governments have done since 2009 is not to increase our exports to earn dollars. It's purely consumption, infrastructure building is a good thing. But along with that, they should have started industries or whatever, agri-exports or whatever to earn dollars. So that's one point I noticed. And also, I was listening to some TV discussions last few days. So all these economists say it will take a minimum of 4 years even to come to a normalcy, but not zero debt situation, but some kind of normalcy. At least 4 years, 4 more years will come. And these 4 years has to be very, there'll be social unrest because the income of the people is not enough to cover their living. So there'll be a lot of social unrest. And to respond to that, the president will increase the number of police forces or whatever, as he mentioned in today's speech somewhere. So suppression of strikes and all this. Then when it comes to the restructuring and privatization, restructuring is okay. They have to cut down the number of employees and all that. When it comes to privatization, I personally do not agree with the statement that government should not do business. I don't agree with that. If you take the whole world, it's only very few countries are doing this. Governments are not doing business. Most of the countries do business as a private public partnership is one of the very successful models. If you take India, and also Narendra Modi's the slides that we just saw, he says partnership, not complete privatization. Bharat Petroleum is a huge enterprise. 60% is owned by the Indian government. Singtel, huge enterprise in Singapore Telecom. I think 55% are owned by the government. More than 50 is owned by the government because these are very major lifelines for a country. Then Sri Lanka has a good example. Sri Lanka Telecom is a success story. Insurance is a success story. These are private-public partnerships. Okay, just see what happened to the these things when you give the 100% to the private ownership. Kalani Tires, Orville Steel, Sevanagala Sugar, Walachine Paper, Tulhuria Textiles. What happened to our private business investors? Genosena Water Pumps? No more. Cecil Fridges? No more. India did not do this mistake. They depend on making their local industries stronger and stronger. And now they have come to making rockets, ships, nuclear bomb, whereas Sri Lanka cannot even make a push bike. Thank you.
Thanks, Lakshman. The government business is not private, not business means exactly what you said, because they should not be totally taking over. Instead, they should promote, like, private government business partnership, if that's what is the best model. So that's what that is meant by that. And Kirti, you are there. Yes, Kirti. Kirti?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Right, I'd like to add a little bit to what Lakshman said. You see, I think the common mistake we made is we are confusing between the state, the government, and the politicians. The state must be involved in businesses, not the politicians. So the state must create the correct infrastructure, correct processes to make sure that the businesses are run on behalf of the people, not on behalf of the politicians. So in almost all countries, but a lot of developed countries, including UK, there are businesses which are run aligned to the state, not the government. The government in power has nothing to do with the business. But the businesses are aligned to the state, so they are serving the people. So that's the basic difference. So the politicians should not be allowed to interfere with the businesses. But the state, the civil service should be structured in such a way businesses can work in partnership with the private sector if necessary and deliver the services and products which are helpful for the country. So let's make sure that we clearly understand. I personally wouldn't say government should not, the states should interfere, interact with the businesses, but the existing government or the politicians should not interfere with the businesses. I think that's a major difference I would like to highlight. I don't know if I made it clear. I hope it is clear, but if anybody has any questions, please do ask.
Thanks, Kirti. I think you're absolutely right. But the problem is the politicians themselves are never going to be good. Even the academics are never going to be good unless they have their own conditions of employment, the restrictions, the law, everything else. So even law and order is now crumbled in Sri Lanka. So this is why that you may not be able to have any kind of proper action based on what the IMF has requested. So I've actually got the summary of the IMF, which I can show, and then show certain crucial things that may be useful. Shall I do that? If that's okay.
Yes, please do. I think the key issue you highlighted is that, as I said earlier, the whole system needs to change. Unfortunately, we can't change everything in one go.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what it is. Let me expand this a little bit. Can you see this one? Can you see this document? So this is the IMF summary. It might take, say, 3-4 minutes to read at least the important bits. So that highlights from the IMF staff report. So advancing revenue-based fiscal consolidation, reforms to society safety nets, fiscal institutions, and state-owned enterprises. So this is what it's about. Now, measures proposed to increase tax revenue include revamping the VAT system to eliminate all specific VAT exemptions. Now, all the duty-free things, cars, everything else should go accordingly. And removal of SVAT, and then introducing a property tax and gift inheritance tax. This is in line with even the developed world as well. So then we have restoring public debt sustainability. So they want to plan in such a way to reducing public debt below 95% of GDP by 2032. So then that means then we can self-govern mostly if we come to that level. And reducing gross financing needs below 13% of GDP between 2027 and 2032. keeping FX debt service below 4.5% of GDP between 2027 and 2032 and closing fiscal and external financial gaps. So that's what it is there. So, and then restoring price stability and rebuilding external buffers. Now, before going to that, I'll just talk other things that is relevant for us. Now, you were talking about various politicians and then political actions. Now, that we should have politicians to take this forward. But then the IMF has done restrictions. Now, because of these restrictions, only the politicians are now shouting, saying, IMF is a problem. Although we initially went saying IMF is the solution. So now the proposed prior actions and structural benchmarks under EFF's supported arrangement, which means now this loan comes in stages if we follow the benchmarks that's been given. So now April 2023, there has to be a parliamentary approval of the new Central Bank Act. I think this has been submitted already to the parliament. I don't know whether it's approved. So at the moment, it has been done. Then completion of the asset quality review component of bank diagnostic exercise for the 2 largest state-owned banks and the 3 largest private sector banks. So there's assessment on the banks, and I showed you about the our Bank of Ceylon and People's Bank performance. That's not very good at the moment. Then May 2023, they want parliamentary approval of welfare benefits payment scheme and application of eligibility criteria and identifying beneficiaries. Now, there is a condition in the IMF that the most vulnerable people, like what I showed at the very beginning, most vulnerable people like children and so on, has to be safeguarded during this difficult time. So that will come in a kind of, don't know what, but that has to be done. Then June 2023, the cabinet approval for a strategy to restructure balance sheets of Ceylon Electricity Boards, CPCs, Pharmaceutical Corporation, Sri Lanka Airlines, and so on, and RDA. Then there's a Banking Act that's due to come. So cabinet approval of a full revision of the Banking Act. Now, I believe that that certain conditions of the act has been slashed about, keeping reserves abroad and so on some time ago. I think these are the kind of things that they want to address in this. I'm not sure, but somebody knows, it's good if you tell us. Then July 23, cabinet approval of revenue measures to support fiscal consolidation. Now, further down, if you go down on that, so every month there's a plan that has to be done. And so there's something called a parliamentary approval of a 2024 Appropriation Act and spending allocations. So it's very controlled the way it is going. And then tax reforms. Now that's something being suggested. And we briefly talked about the tax rates. And so increase the tax rates pertaining to this April to betting and gaming levy. So that's very important. And as you know, that some politicians are actually leaders of these gaming and betting agencies. Then introduce a nationwide real property tax and gift and inheritance tax. Now, given if we follow all that, we get a prediction. So prediction is like that real GDP growth, which is now minus at the moment, will go up. Say it's minus 8.7 here, 2022. It will become positive at least by 2024 and go up to about 3 by 2026, which is an achievement if that happens. Then I want to show these are other things like the revenue will, as a percentage of GDP, will increase to like 50 by 15%, which is positive, which is good if it happens. And the US reserves will also increase to something like 10,800 million. So if that happens, that's good. And then there was a inflation projection, I think, somewhere here. Right. So now 2022 is the most difficult year. The inflation was 57.2% in Sri Lanka. So now if we follow these conditions that's offered by the IMF, it will come down. The inflation will come down to 15% next year. 2024 will be, this year it will be 15%, 22 for 6.7, and then about 5% after that. So if we achieve that kind of inflation, that will be good for the people. But there's a difficult 2 years to go. But because of the restrictions that is there for now coming for the politicians, so because they can't spend the money, they can't have their duty-free cars, this and that, already they have started their campaign to say IMF is not good because they can't use the money in the way they want with all these conditions in place. So I don't know exactly, where we will go and what we can do. We can do means to say these conditions has to be followed if we have to recover kind of thing, at least for the 2 or 3 years, so that the government will hopefully may change within a 2 years or 1 or 2 years. So having that and also maintaining those conditions. So at the moment, say state-owned enterprises, I mean, it's staffed by people allocated by politicians. So they are not competency, meritocracy or based. So they are inefficient. So that is what is happening. So you've seen the summary of this. Now, so we can talk a little bit about that as well. And also particularly what we can do. What we can do is the important thing. What we can do to keep at least on this rail track.
Rula, could you explain to me the condition enact new anti-corruption legislation, please?
I don't know much about it. I mean, these things must be coming. I saw in the papers about the bank, central bank becoming independent or something. That act is coming as planned. So those things exactly is unknown. So all this information that we've gathered from various documents that is there. And this summary was circulated, I think, is Sanjeeva who sent around this summary earlier on. So it's useful to know, and also it's useful to know what we can do in relation to at least stick to this for the next 2 years, so that a new government can then see how to proceed after that. So this is, I think, is important. In our role, I think that's something we can do so that we can take some kind of action like you did for nuclear power plant issue, which is, I think, gaining some support. So we'll see. Lakshman, yes, Lakshman.
Yeah, thank you, Chula. Again, I would like to comment on a few things. Yes, as you said, I think the next 4 or 5 years is going to be very tough for Sri Lanka, because as it is, and even for the last few years' budgets, our expenditure is nearly 3 times, I think, the income for the country. Expenditure is 3 times the income. Whereas I remember during good old days, Ronnie DeMel or N.M. Pereira or Felix Dias, the difference was 10%. And they put forward the budget's proposals, how to fill that gap. About 10%, I think, if I remember, in the 70s, late 60s. So that is one thing. At present, Sri Lankan society has already got used to it. Expenditure is much bigger compared to our national income. And the other thing is, during the Yahapalanya period, when Mr. Ravi Karunanaka was the finance minister, he made a big change in one of the foreign income act or something. Until then, all these people who export, for example, Sri Lankan exports, garments and other things, even agri exports, has to bring back certain percentage, 60% or something, and he removed that act. As a result, many exporters started keeping a good part of their dollar income outside the country. So these are the things which contributes to this crisis.
Yeah, yeah,
Thank you.
true. I mean, that's true, Lakshman. I mean, none of us are really economic experts, but I mean, we have to learn from each other as to what is best and also see what we can do. I mean, this is what I'm asking. So we are just talking, but we should take some action as well to see. I mean, we should support at least if you tell the people that that these IMF conditions has to be followed, then that's not very good for the current politicians. And because there's a lot of revision in relation to state-owned enterprises, the facilities the politicians have, and so on. And also the IMF has this particular condition to look after the vulnerable, and that has to be done. Now, in the way the Sri Lanka will do it, it will give it to another medial man, and they will take all the money and nothing will go to the vulnerable people. That's how it works. And all these tamashas and everything else that happened in the government is all corrupt. So that's the issue. Anything people can suggest what we can do in relation to this, so that at least the people are aware that these conditions has to be followed, and the vulnerable don't have to come to the road, that they actually has to be looked after by the loan facility itself.
Just still one possibility is to, ask the authorities to make it transparent.
Yeah, how can we do that? If we can write it something, at least summarize these documents in a way that we understand, that will be a good one. I can probably talk to one or two economists and find out exactly what those words mean, and then at least put a small singular version and say we need to do these things. Ranjan is there. Ranjan, yes, Ranjan.
Yes, Shula, thank you. 2 points, or rather 3. I see in the IMF, it is their recommendations are weighted heavily on the side of fiscal consolidation. You see, what that means in normal, simple layman's language is increasing taxes. Increasing, in other words, getting the ordinary citizen to pay up more. What the IMF does not seem to, correct me if I'm wrong, to give much weightage to increase the country's production.
Exactly, Ranjan. Yeah.
Yes, Lakshman.
That is our job to do that. At least they have reduced at least they want reduction in unnecessary expense by the politicians and so on. But increasing productivity is something that the government has to do, or people have to do, isn't it?
Yeah, right, Chola,
Yes.
but we don't see any plans by the government to do this. How
But
to
they
increase
don't.
productivity.
But they've always survived on the money that came from elsewhere, and nothing has been productive or increased the productivity was not in their thing at all, is it?
Yeah, we have to lower the tax or give tax incentives to small, medium industries, export-oriented, and some programs to increase the dollar income of the country.
Yeah, I mean, we are talking mostly about personal tax, but we have not talked much about the corporate tax as well. That's where the issue is as well. Because corporate tax, we have not talked, and I don't understand it very much either. So so we are at the moment talking about personal tax. But if you take personal tax, say, I think France is the highest in the world, like 35% personal tax from their income. And we are paying only like 7%. I mean, Ranjan, yes, Ranjan.
Yeah, Chula, to continue,
Yeah.
ultimately, we have to do everything. Okay, we have to, in IMF does not dictate to us. IMF does not dictate to any country. You see,
True.
we are looking, it is unfortunate that our politicians try to put the blame on the IMF and the responsibility on the IMF. That is not correct. My understanding of IMF is not that. You see, finally, they advise us, or any country for that matter, they tell us this is what you should do according to what we think. You see, according to our knowledge of economics. See, our knowledge and experience and our expertise, we are passing it on to you. It is up to you to take it or not. In the case of Vietnam, they took it. In Sri Lanka, we don't. Why? Because the government was strong enough to tell the people that this is what we should do, and the Vietnamese people accepted it, right? In Sri Lanka, no government is strong enough to tell the people this is what we should do. No government is strong enough. Our governments are very, very weak. The weakest probably is the present government because it is headed by a person who is rejected by the people. What confidence do people have in such a person? You see, let us change the polity first and elect a person who has the confidence of the majority of the people of the country, and then we'll see the difference. We are trying to build a skyscraper on the seashore. It's something like that. You see, that's the first. That's one comment. The second comment I want to make is, you see, the IMF also failed to address the issue of accountability. Those responsible for bankrupting the country, accountability, and they should be made to account. The IMF is very silent on that. That is my complaint about the IMF. If they had said the people, in fact, I wrote something to the media on this. Then I can even send it to you all. About 1 or 2 years ago, at the very beginning of this crisis, you see that the IMF should be called upon by the people of Sri Lanka not to give their financial aid to the people who are responsible for the bankruptcy of the country. But that is exactly what they did. They gave the money to the people who are responsible for robbing the people. So how can you ask the people to stand for solidarity, to give up this diyaw attitude that my friend Kriti says? You see, they will keep on saying this because they have no confidence in these roads. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Ranjan. Absolutely true what you are saying. But let's see what Nilmini's got to say. Nilmini, yes.
Thank you, Shula. Just for ease of reference, I've just copied and pasted onto the chat the 5 pillars that the IMF talked about. Not that I understand most of what's in there, to be honest, but I'm hoping that I'll understand it as we go along. But I mean, those words that you've already mentioned, like transparency, accountability, I mean, at least going forward, we must have some accountability. And if the IMF has actually given this loan to the current government, well, they will have it. But the thing is, there must have been some discussion with the IMF where the government's actually set out some strategy for using this money. So what is it? What is the government's strategy for it? And we'd like to know about it. They must publish it. And they must be asked to be held accountable for it going forward, at least. So if the government can set out its strategy and publish it, that would be probably the next step, isn't it?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, but as I showed you the plan over there, there's a central bank act that needs to be revised at the very beginning. I think they are going to get more independence, which is a good thing if that's going to happen. But we don't know ultimately what will be approved by the same crooks who have led to all this. So we don't know. Yes, Kirti, you can say that something. Yes, Kirti.
Yes, I think I simply wanted to add that you see, when IMF gives loans, they can only set certain conditions around financials. how the country is managed is up to the politicians and the people who elect the politicians. So I don't think we can blame IMF for anything. We have to simply accept that this is only a lifeline. Unless we use it intelligently, unless people force politicians to use it intelligently, we'll be back to the same situation very quickly. So I don't think, in my personal view, I don't think we can blame or ask IMF to do anything, except give us some help with certain conditions attached. Thank you.
Yes, Lakshman.
Yeah, Chula. Just a few comments to what Ranjan and Kirti mentioned. IMF has given us the guidelines. Okay, for the next 4 or 5 years, you follow this if you want to get out from this economic mess. And they will not go into details. It's up to our people, our politicians, to plan how to use this opportunity the best possible way to come out of this crisis. And they will not go into tell us the details of how to do it. Only very broad outline of things.
I think I don't know. I mean, the thing is that we need to take some action if we really want to. I mean, we've had a discussion today, but we understood some of it. We don't understand all of it. But to go forward, if we educate more people in their own languages or something, we may be able to get the message across, at least for the vulnerable people who are being brought forward to do all the destruction, shouting, protest, everything else, that they are the ones who are supposed to be supported by the IMF loan itself until the recovery takes place. So then that becomes a question as to what to be done. As I see, I think the Samurdhi and that kind of donations, money has been criticized, and that has to be slashed apparently, because the richest people in the country also apparently claim the Samurdhi. So that's a kind of situation in Sri Lanka. So you can see why it's not going to the vulnerable, that even the little money that is there for the vulnerable is actually going to some of the richest people in the country, because they are not having their incomes declared.
So, Chula, like what we did for nuclear,
yeah,
why don't we prepare a good presentation, not a presentation, article, and then publish it? Because within Sri Lanka, we have to do all these things, and that will pressurize our current government to think about not to go in the wrong direction. I think a lot of ideas came through now. If 2 or 3 people take the responsibility, draft something and improve it and publicize, I think our papers also, they know that they will publish our articles.
No, yes. I think, it's good to make some kind of a reaction to it, so that at least not the whole thing, 1 or 2 points about it,
Yeah.
not everything. So if you all can take at least 1 or 2 points and then write something about it, saying what are the goodness about it, that we should stick to it and so on, then we might be able to get those things implemented, because the general people understand what needs to be done. So at the moment, you can see that even the whole IMF document was available, and I circulated it, but still, even we don't understand exactly the whole document, because we need to understand it. So I can speak to, say, 1 or 2 economists, and if they have the time to discuss this one by one and write something. But I think it's good, like we did for the nuclear, which the 2 letters were completely different, what we published, and they may have a different effect. Once you go to the same place, say like, International Energy Authority, then they might change their mindset as to whether they give the approval or not. So this is why it's useful to take different attitudes and different knowledges, because we all have different backgrounds and the way we write is different. So it might have a different impact. So that's what I'm thinking, whether, yes, Kirti, what you say?
Right. Now, the thing is, I think I agree with all these comments, and it's good to write something. But I wanted to highlight something that happened in the last week for me. I shared the publications about nuclear power to a number of groups. I mean, these groups have about I don't know, at least about 1,000 members altogether.
Yeah.
One of them came back, not somebody living in UK, Sri Lanka, by the way, somebody living in States came back. This must be a hoax. That can't be true. Because that person was not prepared to believe that the government of Sri Lanka would do anything like that. So that's the kind of reaction you get sometimes. So there are people who don't even know that this is going on.
Yeah, exactly. So it's useful to spread the message as much as possible, and then get it going. I mean, as much as possible as well. So if we write something very good, obviously the journalists also get interested, so they will propagate it as well. So I'm just wondering. I mean, I can try, but if somebody can spare one of the, say, economists can spare few, say, at least a couple of hours for me to write what they say, right or wrong. So I can try to do something, but if you all can take at least, say, one section saying why the vulnerability be protected, why the politicians, all these duty-free things should be slashed totally or something like that, then that will be useful. Because I mean, last week I saw that in, I think it's Anuradhapura, where all the pediatricians have left. There were 4 consultant pediatricians. All of them have left, and the ward was closed. Now, Anuradhapura is a teaching hospital and a regional hospital for pediatric services, and the unit is closed. This is sad, really, what is happening. I mean...
Sorry, when you said they've left, where have they gone to?
Gone abroad.
UK.
Don't know where they are.
Australia, UK, usually.
No, there are lots of new Sri Lankan doctors in the UK at the moment, hundreds.
Yeah, but I mean, they are not that happy in a sense, but they have no other alternative because of the kids and so on. So obviously, I mean, you can't complain when a boat is sinking that people try to jump out of it. So that is the natural reaction that people have. But on the other hand, we can do something to try and get the government going on the right path, at least when the people understand it. That is good. But
yes,
that
Chula,
yes, Lakshman.
I think for the nuclear case, I think we have done well after 2-3 meetings. So similarly here, now this is the first meeting we have arranged on this IMF package.
Yeah.
Can't we try to get at least 2 experts on this at the next meeting on the April 16th?
April 16th title is already decided. It's about tourism. There was a PhD person who has done a tourism exploration in Sri Lanka. So he'll have good ideas as to how to improve tourism as a productivity thing. So that's something that will be useful.
Yeah. So 16th and the other one is on the 23rd, no? Right?
23rd also there is already this whole month is booked.
Because I think it's better to have experts' opinion.
Yeah, if they agree to come and talk, that's the issue. So they all have.
This time also we tried. I think Chula tried, but probably too short time for them to.
Yeah, if you can ask someone, that's good. But I will also try to write at least a short document about this, and then give more explanations, like I try to do today as well. Try to explain it a little bit more, like what are the benefits, what are the dangers, kind. Say if you don't follow, what can happen, kind of thing. So that
in the meantime, as you suggested, we can focus on how to help these vulnerable groups.
Yeah, I think that is a very important subject. I don't think we can carry on forever helping them, like, giving fish every day. We can at least do that. So some action has taken place in the schools that I've talked about, which I'm really grateful. Sanjeeva has spoken to many of his friends, and I think they are trying to fund 3 schools now, 3 meals a week for the whole of this year. So it's a good thing that we had done. And if we make a contribution or whatever, when we can, it's a good thing. But I will ask from Sanjeev when he wants that. But that's a good kind of leadership to do something on their own. So likewise, if we can also get this going and get some journalists involved, maybe put something, and then at least talk about one or two topics. Say the IMF says do this, how best it should be done, kind of thing. You see, so that's something that might help. So I mean, I can send you the summary document that I've circulated, so you can have a look and then decide whether we should do something about it.
Lula, just a quick update. When we published the article on 30th on nuclear energy,
yeah,
Dr. Pethiagoda from Colombo Telegraph came on 31st and published another article highlighting and summarizing what we have said and said this should be followed because these are the ideas coming. So I think there is a huge impact. I think we need to do it for this as well.
No, yes, we can do it. We can, at the beginning, say we are ordinary people. We actually got opinions about these from professionals, and then we are writing this as general public. So that is how I've done. So the general letter I wrote has gone to other websites as well. I don't even know where it is. So it's gone to various other things I was told. So obviously it's on circulation, which is good, because if we write in general language, then everybody understands. Now, when even the IMF letter is very highly, say, financial systems oriented, people can understand it. So we don't understand that. Even when you say IMF, we don't understand it. So we have to go back and see what they are doing even. So Nilmini, yes, Nilmini.
Yeah, so in order to make sure that people do understand it, and do you have any experts in mind who can explain a little bit more the points of, for example, in the summary that's in the chat, points 1, 2, 3, 4 of the 5 pillars that the IMF loan's conditional on. That's really, as you said, is you need economists and people with financial experience and tax specialists to advise on those things. Whereas the 5th one on anti-corruption, that kind of stands on its own. But who can put together some commentary on that? Do you have the people that can actually?
Well, I mean, we are totally working voluntarily, so I can ask, say, one or two people who have spoken to us before, and then whether they will engage. And I think the most difficult people to engage are the ones who do financial things. They don't really engage that well. When you say, yeah, I want to do something, they don't come and they don't discuss, don't know whether what they understand is not what we understand, or what the situation, I don't know. So out of the experts, as far as I know, only very few actually come forward in relation to finance expertise.
I mean, number 3, for example, of this 5 pillars, it's so broad, and it's impossible for anybody else to understand unless you're an economist. So a multi-pronged strategy to restore price stability and rebuild reserves under great exchange rate flexibility, etc. I mean, that is really an economist who can understand it and find out how best to find solutions for Sri Lanka. And so I'm not sure whether, I certainly don't understand how that can be worked out myself, but so fostering an environment of investment and growth, and to ensure Sri Lanka's ability to purchase essential goods from abroad, that all of that is very, very broad. So the government must have already thought about these things, surely, otherwise the IMF wouldn't be just asking them to have this money. So what's the government's thinking? Where's the
Well, I mean, I don't know. I've had
plan?
quite a bit of experience with some of these people who are already in the government as well, engaging in various things. And then I mean, even many 10, 15 years ago, when you go to one of the secretaries' office, what happens with them is everything is about commissions and how it benefits them. So that's what's talked about. So what has happened is when you say import certain things, they will do taxes and everything else, how they will benefit, and then they'll take a contract or something to import it. So everything is worked out in such a way so the politicians get something and the importers get something. So that is how it works. There's no standard competition, for example. I know when various hospitals and other things were built, I mean, when there was an inquiry by people, the person who is doing the whole project in the ministry itself, who is a relative, obviously, of another politician, they don't have a single document about how was the hospital ordered, where the equipment came from, what are the techno feasibility studies, not a thing. They have completely destroyed everything. So you just do the corruption and then destroy the documents as well. So you have nothing to show how this happened. And I remember the Austrian government people were struggling. And when there was a presidential inquiry, I had got a CD copy of a particular hospital about all their estimates when it was done by Austrians. And the presidential commission that was appointed to inquire about the hospital came to me and say, "Sir, do you have any documents in relation to this particular hospital?" I was a completely external person who had to be involved because nothing was happening. And then I said, "I got a CD. Do you want this?" So they were very happy to have at least that CD. It's showing all the, actual estimates and how things were done. It's really sad what's happening. And it's very complex as well how to correct this. But the only way is if we train the people that this is the right path, then we will be able to get somewhere, but we have to explain why it's the right path. That is why. So that's why I say, even if you can get 1 or 2 points in the IMF document, and if you understand that, write something about it so that we can spread the message. I can put it on our website as well and say the, pros and cons of our IMF facility. I mean, it's a danger in a sense because we have to pay that loan as well eventually. So if we mess it up, the current people will benefit, current politicians will benefit, but it's the future generations who will have to pay for it. That's the problem. And they are selling the assets as well. So I don't know what the situation is going to be, but we can do what we can do. And considering, the number of people we can talk to, even the people who are arranging protests and things, we may be able to tell them, look, protest on these as well, kind of thing. So
can I just ask you in particular about this number 3? They're talking about alleviating the burden of inflation, particularly on the poor.
yeah.
Do we know anything about what the government's strategy is in relation to that? In relation to
I haven't heard anything, but I am planning to visit UNICEF in May when I go, the UNICEF office, because I wanted this food bank sharing act to be installed in their programs. So I may be able to ask from him exactly what they all are doing in relation to getting these acts together, and then only you will know. So actually, when you personally speak to your friends who are working in the systems, only you understand the truth. Officially, you can't get anything from them, so we don't really know. So that is how you can actually understand the truth. If you go back to Sri Lanka, speak to personally to people.
I mean, that's kind of dealing with the NGOs, but the government itself, they must have got something in mind to control.
They will be knowing, say, for example, UNICEF, WHO, they will be knowing how it's coming through. They will know that. So, because I think they have to be informed or whatever, because the UNICEF is the ones who are doing food donations and things at the moment. So,
and what about agriculture? I mean, is there an effort by the Sri Lankan government to support farming and agriculture?
agriculture is another big issue. I've actually spoken to the just a second, yeah, just a second. So I'm going to have meeting some farmers and directors in agriculture and so on in May. I've spoken to some of them to do this workshop, particularly directing at farmers. Because, I mean, farmers they have very small organizations like the milk feeding farmers, the paddy growers or vegetable growers and so on. They are not united. So they can't make a voice. So I was suggesting whether we should promote the federation or something for the farmers and try to teach them how they should improve their productivity at least. So I'm trying to do something there's a lot of interest there at the moment. So let me see what happens in May. So I mean most of these things you have to be there in person to do it. Otherwise it doesn't happen. Once you go there, it happens. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of small holdings, isn't there, in terms of agriculture? You've got the
Yeah, that's why. So they don't have power because of that. They say, oh, milk feeding people, there are 60 people in that. The other one will have 100 people. So there are lots of small organizations where very few people, and they don't talk to each other or they don't come together because they are farmers. So they don't have that knowledge of how we should do it or something like that. So we need to kind of teach them how to get them their active.
Yeah. And what's the current position in relation to access to fertilizers? Because obviously that was one of the biggest issues over the last year and a half, isn't it? Because they couldn't import fertilizers.
I think they have some access to fertilizers now.
But it's still very expensive, prohibitively expensive.
Everything is expensive. Whatever that is imported is expensive because the dollar is like 350 rupees or something like that. So that's why.
So isn't that something in terms of alleviating burden of inflation, particularly on the poor, if that's part of what the IMF requires, shouldn't that be one of the priorities to make sure that the farming industry, even the small holders, that they've got access to the necessary fertilizers and methods of farming that can mean that we can generate and become more self-sufficient, at least in terms of food, and that'll address the issue in relating to food inflation, which in turn will alleviate the burdens on the poor.
Yeah, you're right in a way, but I think this the fertilizer is available to some extent now. I think, as far as I know, but the situation is different in a way because the fixed salary incomes, say government services and so on, have not gone up. So the hardest hit ones are the middle income people who are there because their value of their salary with the inflation of 57% is like half. So the prices of vegetables and rice and everything else has gone up. So because of that, the farmers get some income because their incomes have gone up. Because the prices of things have gone up. Although still they have middlemen who are making the best profit out of this difficulty. So the worst hit ones are the people who had a kind of a small job but a fixed salary and it hasn't gone up. So those are say government servants are worst hit because their salaries have not gone up. So these are the issues. That's why they are shouting about the taxes, because say when you put 7% or 10% tax on them, then it's very hard for the government workers who got a fixed salary, because it actually eats into them. Say, for example, your value of the salary is now less than 50%. And then after that, you have added tax. So it becomes like another 40% of the value that was there 2 years ago. So, but whereas the others who are doing business, it's not much of a problem. So they are not the ones who are shouting. The ones who are shouting are the ones who get fixed salaries and working in the government. But even the government workforce is too many, apparently 1.5 million people in the government workforce. So, but they actually need only half of it. So those are the issues that we have. Yes, Gratian is there. Gratian, you can alert us to these things. Gratian, yes.
Thank you. Let's look at the country situation.
Yeah.
And we have not come to this bankruptcy all of a sudden. It is a process that started in the 1980s. With the 1983 Black July, there was a lot of people who left the country. Then by 1985-86, in Colombo, the condominiums started coming out. These condominiums were BOI projects done with the material and everything from Sri Lanka, but these were sold outside the country. The profits, the dollars stayed outside. If you look at the country's economy now, the country is getting about $5.5 to $6 billion every year from the migrant workers and expatriate remittances. And that funds about 80% of the trade deficit. IT industry is going to be about $5 billion in 2025. So if you look at the total debt of the country, 55 billion, it is 11 years of migrant and expatriate workers' money. If you look at the assets that are being sold, let's look at Sri Lanka Telecom. The total market capitalization is 173 billion rupees at the current share prices. And that works out to $539 million. 50% of that is about 265 million. If you look at Lanka hospitals, the market capitalization is 80 million. 50% is 40 million. What are we talking? These are peanuts. These are peanuts. The entire stock exchange in the country that comprises 294 companies in 20 industrial classifications has a market capitalization of 4 trillion, which is $12 billion. What is 12 billion? 2 years remittances from the expats, migrants. So if the migrants decide, instead of sending this money to the banks at large, but if they use part of that to buy the capital in the country, they can turn around the country. So if you look at the country right now, every Airbnb, Agoda, Booking.com, every booking that is taking place in Sri Lanka, money is mostly going into a foreign account in dollars or sterling. And on top of that, 15 to 20% from the top level, the commissions are going to Booking.com, Agoda, Airbnb, everything. Uber is taking 15% from the top level, from the sales. So there isn't a single enterprise which can make 15% return on investment or return on turnover. So when we look at the dynamics of the economy, the way the economy is run is not in a sensible way. Say, for instance, all the exporters, the central bank governor has gone on record that these guys are exporting our goods, but they are not bringing in the cash. Then later on, he swallowed his own words. So in 2016, Ravi Karunanayaka came up with a bill allowing these guys to keep the money abroad. So we are talking about allowing these people to keep the money out and buying the assets elsewhere in the world and trying to bring in loans to fund the government. The government is run, the economy is run on a double deficit mode. Double deficit in the sense there is a trade deficit, which means that we import much more than we export. So that trade deficit is about $6 billion a year, which has to be funded from somewhere. trade deficit. Then we have a fiscal deficit. There is a government which spends more money than it gets from the taxes and the dividends of the state-owned enterprises and other mechanisms. So that there is the fiscal deficit. Government is spending more money than it gets. And the economy is sending more money out than it gets as export revenue. Import expenditure is more than the export revenue. So the IMF is very focused on these things, and the IMF has given certain milestones. This has to be done by this time. But one of the very important things that the IMF has told the government about the good governance, it has said, IMF has said very clearly, we are going to have a corruption audit, some sort of study. But IMF also has given the government, you come up with some good corruption legislation. So then the IMF should have told the government, until these two are done, you are not going to sell any of the state-owned enterprises. But what the government is trying to do is sell all the state-owned enterprises before those two critical corruption study and the corruption law. So this is a rogue government which doesn't have a mandate, and it is doing worse things than ever to decimate even the little assets that the people have. The SLT made a 4.5 billion net profit during the last year. It was about 10 billion early. So now it was stated about the Singapore Telecom. Singapore Telecom is investing in Optus. It has shares. Why cannot our Sri Lankan Telecom doing that? So these are the issues. There are fundamental issues. How the government has been run is not correct. How the government is being run, it is pathetic. How the government is going to be run in the next 4 years, terrible. So adding to the incompetence, they are becoming very arrogant. They are going to have legislation to suppress anybody who talks against them. And they are giving 200 million apiece to any MP joining the government, regardless of whatever the term that is left. So this is, I mean, now, if you look at the hunger, 500,000 people have newly joined the poor in the country. And all the enterprises are to be refinanced. IMF is telling the banks need to be refinanced, and the banks are not getting a single cent of all the loans that they have given. And all the SMEs, all the other enterprises, the ones that have gone bankrupt, they have basically closed the shops, and the people are running around asking for food donations from the people on the street, people going from house to house. So this is what I experienced in Sri Lanka. I'm right now from the 10th of February in Sri Lanka, and I'm looking at these things, and I'm working with a few groups, and I'm promoting a strategy. Can't we buy Sri Lanka Telecom? Can't we buy Lanka Hospitals and lock it as a public asset for the posterity? Thank you.
Excellent question. Very good. So you put some light into our confusion. So is it possible for you to, I don't know whether you have time, you're so busy, to help us get this message across to the general public, including ourselves, as to what is right, what needs to be done in relation?
Well, yeah, I mean, for the last 3-4 days, I mean, I have been studying this. That's why the numbers and everything are so sort of, I mean, fresh in my mind. Not that I have a great memory or anything like that. So I have gone to the stock market figures. the company statistics and everything. And what I'm trying to do is, I mean, I went and participated at Sri Lanka Telecom Union meeting also. The message that I carried to them is, you do your traditional protests and everything, and you might be able to save the Sri Lanka Telecom just once more, but the next government will go in the same path. Why don't you get together and become a capital owning workforce? So I think, I mean, they saw some sense in that proposition. So I have been analyzing these things and I'm producing a document. Once I have completed that, I will share that with you. And I mean, I will share that with the group, the entire group, so that, I mean, you can add things, you can criticize, be critical. And if you are getting anybody, economists and anybody to talk to any group, there is a very clear divide along the political lines. The neoliberal economists are saying one thing, and the economists from the left wing, they are saying something else. On Tuesday at 2 o'clock Sri Lankan time, Kalpa Rajapaksa and there is another one. They are talking about the IMF package and how to, I mean, not to get into the trap. So there is a political undercurrent also going in Sri Lanka, because for the first time there is the sentiment or a potential that other than the two big parties, there might be the possibility of NPP JVP coalition coming into power at any level. So that is something dreaded by so many powers, local as well as foreign powers. At whatever the risk or at whatever the cost, they would still want to avoid that. To avoid that, if they want a dictatorship, they will support that dictatorship. This we have seen in many countries. So the political writing on the Sri Lankan wall is not good as well. And to make the matters worse, in 2019, after the Easter Sunday bombing, we went into a negative growth. 2020, it was a negative growth. 21, it has been a negative growth. 22, it has been a negative growth. And 23, we will end up with -3. Next year, prediction is -1.5. So altogether, if you look at from the 2018, by 2025, we will be minus about 16. So from the level of the economy that we had in 2018, we will be minus 16 or 15 there by 2026. So
the IMF projection, which I just showed, I think you missed it, that productivity will be better 3% or something, increase GDP by 2025. So that is if we stick to all these anti-corruption measures and various acts that they have proposed and so on. But obviously we discussed that the politicians may not want to do that because they will have to trash out all the free spending that they can do when we stick to the conditions given by the IMF.
The summary document that you sent, compiled by the NDB stockbrokers, that is a good one. And there are some of these things are graphically shown. So for the economy to grow by 3% in 25, it would have shrunk by about 16% from the level of 2018 by that time. So if the economy was 100 in 2018, by 2024, it will be 84. On the 84, it will be growing by 3%. So this is the impact of the cumulative aspect of the GDP growth. So with all these things, I think, I mean, there is a lot there is a lot of inputs that will have to go into analyze the economy in a holistic, integrated manner. So, from taking from the IMF package, taking from the NDB stockbrokers presentation, I think it is, I mean, we have to force the central bank and the economic planners to come up with some sort of a economic model that the people can understand. Say, each year, what is the prediction of the government income, what is the expenditure, and as Neil Milley mentioned, what are these multi-pronged approaches in bringing down the price stability in the economy? What are the growth sectors? How are we going to support those growth sectors? How are we going to, I mean, look after the vulnerable? How are we going to prevent the rich accessing the benefits that are destined to the poor? All these things we will have to now force, as one point might be the central bank and the treasury, to come up with the integrated plan, because that is beyond any voluntary group's capability. So we should, I mean, tell the IMF, and also we have a very good case to go to the IMF and tell them, look, I mean, thank you for giving the 2.9 billion, and it is not going to help us unless you keep this government honest. And this is a rogue government. And for you to keep that government honest, you have to get this legislation, get your the corruption study done up front before they set about selling any of the national assets. So that has to be done as an immediate step. So we'll have to, I mean, go on the radar of the IMF. We'll have to go on the radar of the CBSL. I think, I mean, if we sort of, I mean, pressurize these two, then of course through them we can indirectly exert pressure on the government. So we have to have a strategy in this particular scenario also. Thank you.
Yeah, I thank you, Gratian. I mean, it's very good, your suggestions. We got some thinking as to what to be done. And in fact, although many of you may not know or even remember that, we actually wrote to IMF some time ago when they came to Sri Lanka to assess the situation. And I think some notice has been there to what we said, because some of the things we said seem to be in the ultimate agreement as well. So it is good if we can write something to IMF, if you can help us, Gratian. And also we need to educate the public. So this is what we were thinking, whether we should expand a little bit more and write something in Sinhalese and Tamil if it's possible, so people understand what these IMF conditions are. Because the politicians are not going to like these conditions at all, because that's not very good for them. That's why.
For that matter, Chula and lady and gentlemen, long years ago, there was a gentleman, I think, I mean, Niyal Sri Amarsekara might still be there. I haven't, I mean, looked at his profile.
Yeah.
While I was doing some research, I have found that Niyal Sri Amarsekara had taken this corruption issue to the IMF directly during a time there was another previous IMF package. And he wrote direct to the IMF, and he stated that, I mean, you are accountable. Then at least the IMF had the courtesy of writing back and acknowledging that there should be something that needs to be done. So I will try to, I mean, get Niyal Sri Amarsekara's correspondence.
That's good. That's very good if you can do that, because then we can come together and write.
Ranjan might be able to dig out. I mean, I think, I mean, there are some research needs, because if we write to IMF, we'll have to sort of, I mean, put them in a certain, I mean, we'll have to, I mean, push them against the.
Yeah, right? We have to provide facts and some evidence to support what
evidence, the things. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
So that's true, Gratian. Yeah. Thanks for your help. Yeah. So I think that is the So we basically have a kind of open verdict as to what we need to do. But so if you have any ideas, just let us know. I'll also try to see whether we can summarize what is good about certain things and what conditions that we had to be wary about. Or we need more disclosure and definition in relation to what the IMF is saying. So I think we come to nobody's raised their hands anymore. And can I conclude for the time being, and then we will take it up depending on what we can come out with. Yeah. All right. I think everybody's answered. Okay. Thank you very much for discussing this. It's a very important topic, but not any of us understand individually as to what exactly it is. So we'll try to get this more scrutinized and then come out with a general format to see how we can contribute so that the country will be on the right track. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. Good night to
Thank you,
everyone.
Chula.
Good night.
Good night.